Thank you, Devamitra, for that introduction. I was invited to give a talk to you in this class a few weeks back. And of course I was asked, well, what would you like to speak about? And frankly, I hadn't a clue. There's so many things I could speak about, but one or two members of the team, including Devamitra, suggested solitude. And the reason for this is, well, apart from the fact that it's obviously a very good thing to introduce you to the idea of solitude, and so you can get some feeling, understanding of how that fits into the overall scheme of Buddhist practice. But partly because I did a 9-month solitary retreat not that long ago. It came to an end, I think, at the end of May last year. So I was completely alone for 9 months in a hut in the mountains in Spain, without electricity, with just very, very basic accommodation, a wood stove to keep me warm because it's there over winter, and a food drop every week in a bin about 200 metres from where I was staying. So I had no contact virtually for 9 months with anybody else. So why on earth would anybody, any sane human being, want to do such a thing as that? You may be wondering. I must confess, in the middle of my retreat, I began to wonder that myself. Subhuti did an 8-month retreat, I think about, maybe 4 or 5 years before this, and I talked with him before, when I was thinking about doing my retreat, and asked him, well, how did you go about it? What do you have any tips? And he did have a few tips, but one of the things he said to me was, he said, Devamitra, there'll be moments when you think you're going completely mad. I thought, no, that's Subhuti. But actually he was right. So it wasn't so much that I was falling out of life, I was falling out of my tree. At least that's what it felt like. So yes, I did a 9-month solitary retreat. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. But first of all, perhaps I better explain, well, why bother? Why do such a mad thing? Well, to start with, solitary retreats are very much part of Buddhist tradition. If you go right back to the early days of the Buddha himself, you'll find him encouraging his own disciples to go and meditate in solitude. And that's what Buddhists throughout the ages have done. So it's quite traditional to go away on your own, sometimes for very, very long periods, years at a time, and just be alone, meditate on your own, have no contact, or virtually no contact with anybody outside your wherever it is you are. Ideally, you go to a remote place and you stay there. You don't go outside your immediate retreat environment. So when Sangharakshita founded the Triratna Buddhist community and the Triratna Buddhist order, he used to encourage us very much in the early days to think about going on solitary retreat. He thought, just to start with, just take it easy, a month, just try a month, see how you get on with a month. So, of course, well, some of us did, I did. My first retreat was 5 weeks in December in dull, dank Wales. I swore I'd never do another retreat in Wales, and certainly not at that time of year. It was December. It was, with hardly any light. It was really pretty miserable. Anyway, most years since then, I've done a solitary retreat for about a month. I did a longer retreat, I think about 20 years ago, for about 3 months. But this time, I did a 9-month retreat. The reason I did that was because the opportunity was there. It's like if you see food, you eat it just because it's there sometimes. Well, I had the opportunity. I was homeless. I had nowhere to live. And that meant I had no rent to pay. My mother had just died about a year previously, so I had no further family responsibilities upon my shoulders. I was free to go and do it. One of the solitary retreat huts at Guhyaloka was available, and the community there were happy for me to do a 9-month retreat. So I booked it and I went. So, again, why do you do such a thing? What's the purpose of it? The main purpose of a solitary retreat really is to get to, to come to a better understanding of who you are, what you are, better understanding of your own mind, what makes you tick, experience yourself more fully. most of the time we don't really experience ourselves at all, in a way. I mean, there's so many distractions in our lives, so many things that we can turn to which will take us out of our immediate experience. It's as if we forget that there's something apart from the distractions in life which we have to begin to experience more intensively or learn to see and feel. So if you go into solitude, you're putting yourself in an environment where you're removing all those distractions from your life. You're just going somewhere to be completely alone. No other people. Other people are a major distraction, a major source of distraction to us. There's no one to turn to on a solitary retreat. Not if you're strict about it. There's no, well, I mean, I took a few Dharma books, I mean, about 4 or 5 books, which I read occasionally for inspiration. And I limited my reading to 40 minutes a day, usually 20 minutes in the middle of the day and 20 minutes at the end of the day. And very often I didn't even do that. But I only wanted to read as a source of inspiration, to help me focus my mind on the Dharma. I didn't want to allow reading to become a distraction, because it so easily can. And it would have taken me away from my own immediate experience. I didn't want to do that. Similarly, writing can be a distraction. Well, it can be a distraction for me. I don't know about other people, but it can be a major distraction. It can be very creative. You can thoroughly enjoy yourself writing, but again, it's something which very easily takes you out of or away from your immediate experience. And I didn't want that. So, of course, when you go into retreat of any kind, you would expect to do a certain amount of meditation too. But Sangharakshita, in his general recommendations for solitary retreats, even warns against doing too much meditation, because even meditation can be a distraction. I sort of always understood that, but I learned to understand that even more deeply on my 9-month solitary retreat, because I noticed that when things got difficult, and believe you me, there are times, and it does get very difficult, there were always times outside of when I was doing formal meditation practice. It never seemed to happen when I was sitting in front of my shrine, because my mind was occupied. It was occupied with the breath, or with developing metta, or whatever else it was that I was doing. So I decided that I wouldn't do too much meditation. I meditated, I think 4 times a day, and I did a puja as well. I was following our general system of practice. Some of you may be familiar with this. I'm not going to go into that now, but I had a general pattern that I was following on a daily basis with regards to meditation. So I'd meditate when I first got up, I'd meditate mid-morning, I'd meditate sort of late-ish afternoon, and then early evening. That's all. But the most important thing I did was I had an extensive period every day when I did just nothing. Or at least I tried to do nothing. You try just doing nothing. See how quickly you get bored with it. See how quickly you seek your distractions. But to just sit and do nothing is really a very, very difficult practice. And by doing nothing, I really did mean do nothing. Don't think about something. Don't daydream. Just try to stay and experience whatever there is, if you like, in the forefront of your mind. Or even not even that, just sort of experience what's around you. The environment, the birds, the animals, the weather, and so forth. Just experience it. So every day I would make sure that I had one lengthy period of doing nothing, at least an hour every day. It was sometimes much longer than that, sometimes a bit less. But there were other moments during the course of the day as well when I was doing nothing, or at least trying to do nothing. But one's capacity for distraction is highly creative. Even on a solitary retreat, I did find myself sometimes distracting myself from my immediate purpose. But I tried to catch myself out. I tried to stop myself from doing that, not indulge in some little fantasy or some little, something from the past, dwelling on the past, speculating about the future, instead of just staying straight with the immediate present and whatever my experience might be. So that might give you some idea of what it was I was trying to do, and also, therefore, what it is that, in a way, one tries to do on a solitary retreat, why you go and do it. There's another dimension of this, though, which I think is worth mentioning, which is that it's very important to have a sense of your existential loneliness, or aloneness, that's a better word, not loneliness, but aloneness. The fact that, in a certain sense, we are all completely alone. We die alone, that's for sure, we know that. We can't take anything or anyone with us once you die, once consciousness, if you like, has been released from the body. We die alone. And essentially, we are alone. Or at least that's what we experience. We experience ourselves as different from all other selves, all other living beings. So we are, but very often again, we don't really experience that. And again, it's the sort of thing, it's the sort of experience that perhaps we try to seek some distraction away from. But in solitary retreat, you can't get away from that. There's nobody else to talk to. You are alone. And there are moments when you really feel that. You really feel it very, very intensely. And sometimes that's quite painful. Not always, but sometimes it is. And it's in those moments that I was most tempted to seek some sort of distraction. But I tried to resist it. So there you are. You've got some idea of what it is we try to do on a solitary retreat. So what to do now? I'm going to tell you about my retreat in a bit more detail, but I think there might be one or two things it might be useful to say first. Maybe I've said enough. Maybe I'll just tell you about my retreat, how it worked out, and hopefully what I learned from it. And I must watch the time so I don't go on for too long. So, I went on my retreat at the beginning of September in Spain, the beginning of autumn, very beautiful time of year in the mountains. My only companions were the animals around me, the insects, the spiders, the scorpions, the snakes, the lizards, the squirrels, the pine martens used to occasionally keep me awake at night because it would scamper across the roof. And the wild boar that would be looking for food outside my hut most evenings, and the ibex, the wild goats, so many different kinds of birds. They were my companions. And some of them I began to get to know during that 9 months. I had my own personal bat, not a cricket bat, a flying bat, a bat that used to sort of sleep during the day in a sort of, it was a slight gap between the post holding up the awning under which I would sit outside and the awning itself. And every evening it would just flit out and I'd see it coming back in the morning. So I was very aware of the environment, I was very aware of the animals around me, I was very aware of nature. I was very aware of the elements because I was in a totally exposed place. I was high up in a valley, looking across to another mountain range, fantastic view from my hut. And I was very fortunate because it was so high that I got the sun all year round, even in the height of the winter. But the fact that it was so high also had a major disadvantage because it was facing directly west, which was the direction of the prevailing wind. And in the mountains, the winds get very, very strong. And it seemed at times that they would never, ever stop, that there would never, ever be anything other a turbulence in the air, in the atmosphere outside my hut. And so the wind was very much a feature of my retreat. So it's very elemental too. You're exposed to the elements, to the cold, to the warmth, to the sun, to the sky, to the wind, and of course the stars at night and the moon when it's there. So it's a very, very peaceful, very, very beautiful environment. Perfect setting for solitude. So, when I went into my retreat, I eased my way into it. I started meditating every day, 3 or 4 times, and then did my puja in the evening. Started chopping up firewood because I knew I'd need the wood for the winter. I didn't want to get caught without wood. So that was one of my daily tasks. And of course, it's amazing how much of your time does get taken up with just performing simple tasks like that: chopping wood, cooking for yourself, washing your clothes, because unfortunately, even in solitude, you have to wash them occasionally, and that sort of thing. But always there's plenty of time just to sit and do nothing. And then after about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I noticed something was happening. And I wasn't surprised. I was waiting for it. I was almost expecting it. The first sort of sense of, how would you describe it? It's like a shaking in the legs. And I thought, oh, here we go. Fear. But it didn't stay. It just came, and the strength of my legs would return and it would pass. But I knew that was a sign for something yet to come. So I was aware that that at some point fear would arise. It's a very common experience in solitude. I mean, most people who go into solitude have to face this and experience this. And this fear slowly built until one day I did something very silly. I was dragging up a huge pile of wood from the bottom of the hill on which my hut was perched. I was dragging it up early one morning for firewood. The bundle was way too heavy. I was dragging it with a rope. It was all tied together. And I really strained my chest. I pulled a muscle in my chest here, an intercostal muscle. I knew it was an intercostal muscle. I knew perfectly well that's all it was. And it didn't trouble me to begin with. But that, of course, was my rational mind. What happened slowly was that that my irrational mind, or my unconscious mind, began to play upon that, because the soreness here, I mean, it wasn't huge, but I was aware of it, didn't go away. And so, of course, the unconscious mind starts playing around with this and says, maybe it was your heart. And then I'll think, no, don't be silly. Of course it's not your heart. It's just an intercostal muscle. But then my unconscious would take over again. How do you know? Forget it. It's not my heart. So I'd forget about it and then go to bed. And then I'd feel it. And, oh, that could be your heart, you know. And so the mind would play with it. And I thought, no, this is nonsense. It's not my heart. It's an intercostal muscle. I'll prove it. So I pressed it hard. And apparently, I'll learn later, I pressed at a point where there's a nerve goes right down there. And it generated a very sharp sensation, like an electric shock, straight through my heart. That's what it felt like. So this set me into panic mode. What do you do? Well, I had to wait until morning, but I thought, look, this is really silly. It's just an intercostal muscle. It's not your heart. But as the day grew on, the fear crept in and took over completely. And I've been in this sort of situation before in solitude, but I thought, well, I don't want the next what would be 7 or 8 months to be characterised by this sort of thing. I knew that there was a doctor staying in the community at that time. He arrived in the valley the same time as I did, and I knew he'd still be there. So I sent a note and asked if he wouldn't mind just checking me out. I said I was 99% certain this had nothing to do with my heart, but would he mind please just having a quick look? He came up, he did, he said, yes, I agree with your diagnosis. It's got nothing to do with your heart. Although if I wanted to be really sure, I'd have to go down to hospital. I wasn't prepared to do that. But anyway, that sort of took the sting out of it. I thought, okay, I know it's not got nothing to do with my heart, and forget about it now. And I did. But then there was a pain here. A couple of weeks later was that. And pains all in other parts of my body. Partly I'm getting old, of course, but what then happened was that every time there was a painful sensation in my body, the unconscious, which had been awakened, decided to latch onto it, whether it was here, or wherever. And that's the sort of thing that happens to you when you're on your own. You can't turn to outside help. I mean, I did on that first occasion, but in retrospect, I felt it was a mistake. This is something I need to sort out for myself. Anyway, I did turn for help on that occasion. But then when these other things started to happen, I could see that my unconscious reactions, if you like, were beginning to get out of control. So what then happened one night, about 2 months into my retreat, was that I can't remember what it was. I think it was a pain in the gullet again, and my mind latched onto it, and started to the fear that it was generating just got more and more and more intense. And then all sorts of very strange things happened. I had a pain here, which seemed to push up into my groin, and then up into my intestines, and then whiz round and round and round like a spin dryer. And then I suddenly felt nauseous, and I vomited, and I had spasms down this side of my body. This was all in a matter of, about an hour or two, and it went on for several hours. In the end, I thought that I was going completely mad, because my mind was getting out of control, and my body was getting out of control. The fear was getting more and more intense. I didn't feel I could be rational about anything, and the body just seemed to be going crazy. And I remember reflecting or thinking, if that's the more that I was thinking, well, look, my body has got a mind of its own. My mind's got a will of its own. I didn't think in the moment, well, if my mind's got a will of its own, my body's got a will of its own, what else is there? I didn't think that at the time. I did think about it later and reflected upon it. But anyway, it seemed like there was something else which was separate from all this. But anyway, things were getting out of control. So I decided, this is in the middle of the night, to send a text. I did have my mobile phone with me. I sent a text to a doctor friend in Melbourne, on the opposite side of the planet. Because he's a very good friend of mine. He's a neurologist. And he's told me that we've been talking about anxiety earlier in the year when I was in Melbourne. And he said, look, there's certain forms of anxiety which are physiological. They're physiologically induced, for which you need medication. And so my mind had latched on to this idea, oh, well, maybe that's what I need. Maybe I need medication. If I have the medication, maybe this anxiety will just go. So he phoned me back about 2 hours after he got my text. We had a very, very brief conversation. It couldn't have lasted more than 2 minutes. It may not have even lasted that long. I told him what was on my mind and said, no, Devamitra, this is psychological. End of conversation. I knew it in my own mind, really, but it was somehow I felt I'd come to the end of my own resources. I needed to turn outside for help. And over the next 5 weeks, because things got worse after that, initially there was the sort of sting was taken out of it, but things seemed to get worse. I sent 2 more texts to Melbourne and had 2 more very, very brief conversations, and got the same answer each time. No, it's psychological. After the third call, I felt dreadful. Not because I felt I might be, ill or dying or something like that, but because I felt here I was, almost 4 months into my retreat, and I was wasting a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I didn't want to do that. I knew I wouldn't get this it was unlikely to get that opportunity again. And here I was, breaking my terms of engagement with the retreat and calling for outside help. And suddenly I felt really desperate. And I thought, right, I cannot do this again. I must not do this again. And so I took a very, very firm resolve. I resolved that even if I felt like I was fatally ill and actually dying, I must not call for any further outside help, but just face it, whatever it was. So I made that resolve very, very firmly, and then everything settled down. It was as if I was being tempted by Mara. Do you know about Mara? The sort of mythical being that tempted the Buddha before his enlightenment, assaulted him in his own mind. So I felt I was being tempted by Mara. but I felt that I'd somehow managed to call Mara's bluff. And so from that point onwards, things got, in one sense, a lot easier. In another sense, they also got more difficult, but that's another story. But my mind settled down. And having made that resolve and being determined to stick by it, it was as if suddenly I'd created a space in my mind. My mind felt much, much less cramped. And I felt, therefore, that I could go deeper into my own experience and really see and feel what was there. And so that's what I tried to do over the remainder of my retreat. Well, in fact, I was trying to do this all the time anyway, but somehow I had a bit more space in which to do that. So when things got really difficult in the early stages of my retreat, partly what I had to do to deal with that was to try to dig underneath what was really going on. Because all the time I knew partly this is simply my unconscious mind playing tricks. But I somehow had to try to undermine the process, whatever this process was that was going on. So I was getting anxious. So I asked myself, why am I getting anxious? I don't mean in the immediate moment, am I anxious because it's going to rain hard and that sort of thing. But why am I anxious? And the only answer I could come up with was I'm anxious because I'm attached to my physical body. Because all the anxiety was rooted in the experience of pain and my reaction to that pain, which is a reaction of anxiety. So that implied that, therefore, I was attached to my physical body. So that was the first step backwards, as it were. Okay, so the next question was, why am I attached to my physical body? And the answer I found was that, well, I'm attached to my physical body because I identify with it. So why do I identify with it? Well, I couldn't get much further back than that. The last point I reached was I identify with it because of ego clinging or self-clinging. If you read the Buddhist text, if you read the Pali Canon, if you read Milarepa, and I was reading Pali text, I was reading Milarepa on my retreat, they both frequently refer to self-clinging. That's the term the Pali translators use. Milarepa uses the term ego-clinging. That's what was holding me in. That was the ultimate source of all my anxiety. Of course, it's the ultimate source of much, much more than that. But that was, if you like, very helpful, tracing back, trying to see how one condition led to another. Ego clinging gave rise to a sense of identity. Identity gave rise to a sense of attachment. Attachment gave rise to the anxiety I was experiencing. So this is a very, very useful process of reflection for me. And once I'd done that, I decided I really had to try to get beneath whatever this ego clinging was, try to see it, try to identify it, try to experience it directly. And I think perhaps by degrees I did manage to get at least a glimpse of that. I won't say much more, but at least I feel now what it is that I'm trying to deal with, what it is I'm working with as a Buddhist. After 42 years of practice, I had a glimpse of that. And it's a glimpse which has stayed with me, but it's not easy to sustain. So this is the main work that I did on my retreat, really, trying to cut underneath all that. So for the next, after my point of crisis, the remaining 5 months or so, I just steadily got on with what I had to do, trying to stay with my own experience, and trying to relax into it in a way. So my mind calmed down considerably from that point onwards, but also became a bit too calm. It's almost like it became becalmed, like a boat on the ocean that can't move because there's no wind to drive it forwards. And I felt like I needed to cut yet further deeply into my experience. But it is not something you can force. You can just wait and see what happens, see if anything happens at all. And so eventually, after another 3 months, something rather dramatic happened, which was that I was meditating one day. I felt perfectly all right. It was a nice day. It was the beginning of spring. My mind was fairly focused on what I was doing. I was meditating on the Tara mantra at the time. I remember it very, very vividly. And then suddenly I found myself falling into a deep pit of despair. It wasn't a physical sensation. It wasn't a spatial sensation. It was a kind of emotional falling. And it's like I went down and down and down. And with each second, the intensity of the sort of mental pain became more and more unbearable. And this went on for several minutes. Until finally, as I was sitting there, because I couldn't do anything, I was just sitting there absolutely aghast, really, not knowing what to do. But a voice spoke within my mind. It wasn't a psychotic experience. A voice spoke. It was my voice. And the voice said, I am not my mental state. Where that came from, I don't know. It was just suddenly there. And as a consequence of that, I felt myself rising and rising and rising very, very rapidly. Until finally I emerged, as it were, into a very, very tranquil, very calm, very wonderful sort of state of consciousness, I suppose. And I sat with that, and then I went outside. And when I went outside, I sat down and looked across the valley towards the mountains opposite, and I just laughed and laughed and laughed. I don't know why, I just couldn't stop myself. Now, again, there was something which is very interesting about this, because something triggered it. I think there was something which definitely triggered this experience. Probably there are triggers for most things. And immediately I knew what it was. I had allowed my mind to dwell upon something that was said to me shortly before I went into my retreat. One of my long-standing friends had said to me, Devamitra, some of your recent contributions to Shabda, that is to say, the order sort of newsletter that we circulate once a month, have not really helped you. What he meant was they've not really helped the way that some order members perceive me. I'm a man with a reputation, if you haven't gathered that already. And anyway, he said this to me, and it played on my mind. It played on my mind right at the beginning of my retreat, and I thought, no, put that to one side. You're not going to dwell on that for 9 months. But towards the end of my retreat, it surfaced. And my mind was beginning to dwell upon it a little bit. And so it seemed to me that these two things were connected. The experience I've just described to you, and the fact that my mind was a little preoccupied with this issue, you know, how I'm perceived by others. It doesn't matter how I'm perceived by other people. It doesn't matter how any of us really, in a way, are perceived by other people. You may be familiar with what we call the 8 worldly winds. 2 of those worldly winds are praise and dispraise. And we all experience them. Even the Buddha experienced dispraise. Nobody ever can get through life without experiencing dispraise. But we don't like it when we get it, usually. We like praise, because that's pleasant, but dispraise is not pleasant. And I didn't like it either. But I'd had quite a bit of it. And so I'd allowed this to play on my mind, and I'd allowed myself to let it, in a way, get me down. And I realised that if I did that, then I would probably find myself in that pit of despair that had been shown to me, if you like. And that was, if you like, the lesson I took for myself from that. So that, if you like, this illustrates the point I started off with. One of the purposes of a solitary retreat is to get to know and understand yourself better, to see the workings of your own mind, get to understand the mechanics of it, if you like, and therefore help you to deal with it more effectively. So that was one of the fruits of my retreat. Then right at the end, I must confess, when I came out of my retreat after 9 months, and I spent a little bit of time with the community at Kuhiloko where I was staying, the first thought I had, because they'd asked me, well, will you tell us about your retreat, please? The community wanted me to meet up with them and just tell them what had happened over those 9 months, because they'd been servicing me in a way, they'd been dropping food off for me, making sure from a distance that I was all right. And so they wanted to know what had been going on, so I told them. But the first thing I said to them, I said, I think I might have just wasted the last 9 months of my life. Because when you're in the midst of something like that, or when you're just still very caught up with it, you can't see it in perspective. All you know is that you feel, well, you've done something, but what have you got to show for it? You can't see it. But a few days later, after I come out of my retreat, the community wanted to go down to a place called Albir, where there's an Indian restaurant, and they used to like to go there occasionally for an Indian meal. And I was going to be leaving, I think 2 days later. I said, do you mind if I come with you? I was actually fasting at this point, by the way, so it was a bit of a strange request. I said, look, I'll be fasting, but I'd still like to come with you. Do you mind? No, they didn't mind. I was still finding it very, very difficult to speak because I hadn't spoken for 9 months, and to say anything at all was really quite an effort. The words just wouldn't come. I mean, I knew I had things to communicate, but to actually talk was suddenly very difficult. So we went into this restaurant together, and I just sat down at the end of the table, let them get on with what they were doing, chatting amongst themselves. I was just sitting there observing everything around me. And I suddenly felt a tremendous warmth for all the people in there. I didn't know most of them. They were just English holidaymakers having an Indian meal on the Costa. And but I was just looking around. I mean, people who are obviously out for the night with friends or with family, they seemed to be having a good time. And as I was looking at them, I wasn't doing this deliberately. These thoughts or these reflections just surfaced into my mind. They think this is real. They believe in this. On one level, I didn't and couldn't anymore, at least for that evening. And it was a very remarkable sort of experience. It was a bit like it was a bit like bereavement in a certain sense, oddly enough. I don't know, most people have experienced a loss of someone really dear to them in their lives. And when that happens, it's very, very painful. But you also can feel quite detached. And you look around you and you see what people are doing with their everyday lives, and it seems crazy. Why are they getting caught up in these petty details of life? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? It all suddenly seems to lack meaning. And I had that sort of sensation in this restaurant, but not with any sense of pain. It was not painful at all. It was quite the opposite. But it had the same kind of detachment. And so I think that, for me, was one of the immediate fruits of my retreat. And then I began to see, well, maybe I have gained something during these 9 months after all. As time has passed, because it's over a year now since I did my retreat, I have no doubt that retreat had a huge impact upon me. In fact, I would say that for me, it was a life-changing experience. And I feel very, very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do it. When it was difficult, it really was extremely difficult. There were moments when I felt I just wanted to run away, leave it all. But underneath all that, I knew perfectly well there was no way I was going to do that. I was determined to see it through, and I knew that I would, even though at times it was the last thing I wanted to be doing. Having said that, it's important that I also say to you, I've described to you this evening a lot of the more difficult aspects of my retreat, but actually, most of the time, I was perfectly content and happy. It was just odd moments, but they were very, very intense moments when it was really, really difficult. And I found myself, for example, yearning for human company. But of course I couldn't have it. That was the whole point, to experience myself away from all that. I was just yearning for something else, to be away somewhere else, to be out of this place. Because somewhere I was not wanting to face or accept my own immediate experience. And that's a very, very hard lesson to learn. I still haven't learnt it. I've got a lot more learning to do on that score, believe me. But at least I feel I've made a start towards that. So that gives you some idea of what a solitary retreat can be like. Certainly a long solitary retreat, a relatively long solitary retreat. It's the longest solitary retreat I've ever done. It's the longest retreat of any description I've ever done. But I hope you haven't found it off-putting. It's quite a challenge, but it's a very, very rewarding thing to do. I've never regretted having done any of the solitary retreats that I've done. I don't know how many I've done in the course of my life. I must have done quite a few by now. But they really are very worthwhile doing. You might like to try experimenting. See if you can spend a weekend alone somewhere or whatever. Just find how it is for you just to be alone with yourself, with just you and your mind. What I had to face for 9 months was me and my mental states. And I got thoroughly fed up with my mental states because they were so often so petty. Well, I mean, you know your own minds. I bet you, if you're honest, you probably find that that's true of you too. Many of our thoughts are just so petty about other people, even about yourself. They're not very directed. They're not very focused on certainly not focused on the Dharma. They're not focused on anything usually. They're just aspects of our distraction. But to have that, a dose of that, a solid dose of that for 9 months is quite strong medicine. And then there's this whole question of me. What is me? Who is me? Me and my mental states. Can I separate the one from the other? What do I mean by me? What do I mean by mental states? What do I mean by my mental states as opposed to yours? Very interesting questions that this kind of experience throws you up, throws in your face, really. I think one of the most appalling realizations, and it wasn't a new one, I'd certainly been there before, was to see the extent to which I seemingly had no control over that mental chatter. I'd really try just to bring my mind back to my objective, if you like, or to the Dharma. Just to stay focused, stay with my experience, but off my mind would be going right, left and centre. 1,000 times a day I'd be tricked, I'd be caught out 1,000 times a day and more. I try to bring myself back to my immediate experience. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. Well, I think it's probably time I stopped speaking, at least stopped speaking in the sense of giving you a talk, as it were. I was hoping that you might have some questions for me. You don't have to, of course, but if anyone does have any questions, please fire away.
I have one. Because I don't know how to articulate this. Did you find that through doing this, that you had a sense of purpose where you now, like you could go either two ways. You could just be in solitary for the rest of your life, and would that serve humanity, or has it taken you somewhere else where now?
I think I get an understand. I think I understand what you're trying to get at. Correct me if I'm wrong, but. Well, first of all, I think that to live a life of solitude will be one way of making a major contribution to, let's say, sustaining the Dharma, keeping the Dharma alive in this world. I mean, Milarepa, the great Tibetan yogi, spent most of his life living in caves, alone, isolated, but he had many disciples. He wasn't completely alone all the time, and he I think the Buddhist tradition really represents the sort of archetypal hermit, the man who is able to remain alone in very difficult circumstances. I mean, I was living in luxury compared with the conditions Milarepa was living in. So that would be one certainly valid thing to do. It's not what I've chosen to do. I would if I had time enough left. I'm 67 now, so I don't know whether I'm going to have the opportunity to do another long retreat. I certainly would like to. I would certainly consider doing a 3-year solitary retreat now. I feel, having done 9 months, I could do it, but that might have to be for next life. I need a new. I think I've reached the stage, frankly, where I need a new body anyway. So maybe the sooner it comes, the better, and I can get on with it. But Sangharakshita has always encouraged us as members of the Triratna Buddhist order to think in terms of what he calls intensive withdrawal, that is to say retreat, and intensive engagement. So what happened for me when I came out of that retreat was first of all, I really did not know what I was going to do, because I had nowhere to live. I came back to London, and very kindly, the order members in the community upstairs, at the very top here at Samagavasa, where Jnanavacha and Maitreya Bandhu live, agreed to let me stay for the first month to try and sort of reorganise the rest of my life. So I did that, and then I managed to get my friends in India, Nagaloka in Nagpur, to agree to let me stay there and teach there for 5 months. So shortly after my retreat, I went out to India for 5 months, and that was intensive engagement. It was the most difficult visit I've ever made to India, actually, in a number of ways. Very, very trying, very testing. But I thought it was quite interesting that it came straight after that very, very intense period on my own. It was perfect for me, really, because I felt a certain kind of continuity from being alone in Spain to engaging with what I had to do in India, which at times was very demanding in some quite unexpected ways this time. And I spent a lot of time in India over the years. I think that would definitely be my preferred mode of engaging with the Dharma. I don't really I'm not ready to become a Milarepa. I thought I was when I was 26, and I discovered that I wasn't. But I like to engage. I like to give talks. I like to meet people at this centre. Now that I'm based here, I hope to get to know quite a few of you a lot better. But for me, that's the pattern. And I think for most people, that is the sort of pattern that you need. The fundamental problem of the spiritual life is overcoming this issue of self-clinging. And there are 2 ways of going about this. One would be intensive meditation, because there are certain meditations that you can engage with which will help you to, if you like, see through your ego clinging, through your self-identity and so forth. I was doing one of those on my retreat every day, the contemplation of the 6 elements. It's a kind of contemplation of impermanence. So that's one practice which helps you to see through that. But there's another way. You don't have to do that. There's another equally valid way of helping you to overcome this self-clinging, and that is intensive engagement for the benefit of others, with the Dharma, for the benefit of others. In other words, the altruistic dimension, what we call the altruistic dimension of going for refuge, the altruistic dimension of Buddhist practice. So you have these 2 things. You have the self-regarding dimension and the other-regarding dimension. I think most of us need to work pretty hard on both. And so that would be that's my preference, to do both. I definitely feel I want to go back into solitude again. And I really would like to do a longer retreat, actually, but that's almost certainly not for this life. I vow to do it in the next life. Be my witness. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah?
Can you throw some more light onto, you mentioned that meditation was coming in your way.
Yeah.
Because my idea of meditation, anapanasati, is that you want to get into that zone of nothing.
Yeah.
And how did you? I want to get to understand the level, where you mentioned that meditation was coming in your way.
Well,
because you were looking out for nothing.
That's right. Well, I always knew that Sangharakshita had said, even on a solitary retreat, and that's the context in which he was speaking, too much meditation could be, or could become, a distraction. And I thought I could understand why that might be the case. But on my own long solitary retreat, I felt I could understand why he said that. It made sense to me because I think, as I said when I was speaking, that my most difficult moments never happened when I was sitting in front of my shrine, because my mind was engaged with the practice. I mean, it was. I wouldn't say that I was being distracted by the practice, but if the purpose of a solitary retreat, actually the main purpose, is to just be able to sit and do nothing and experience what's immediately there, then meditation could be a distraction.
Yeah. It's not letting you test yourself enough.
I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't like to generalise about that, but I thought it was interesting that Sangharakshita made that observation. And I don't know if you've seen, there's a book out there, was The Purpose and Theory and Practice of Buddhist Meditation or something. Big, thick book, collection of Sangharakshita's talks and so forth on meditation. He makes this point there. It's a whole chapter or a whole section on solitary retreat. You could read what he says there. But I knew he'd said that. It sort of made sense to me. But on that 9-month retreat, I could see, yes. I knew how meditation, even for me, could become a bit of a distraction from my purpose, the purpose I'd set myself on that retreat, which was just to be able to do nothing and sit with my experience and not allow myself to become distracted from it.
Is it because meditation is engaging your mind in a way, because you are, although not engaging your mind in thoughts, but you're engaging your mind doing something?
Yes. Well, yes, you are. It's a very valid thing to do, and I was doing it deliberately every day. I wanted to. That was part of my retreat. But I think it's important also to have periods when you're not trying to do that. Excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat. So, does that
Yeah.
answer you?
Yes. What I was telling Devamitra earlier was that meditation in itself, sitting down for 40 minutes, is difficult because you still have your thoughts coming through.
Mm.
When you're on solitary retreat, you have many more thoughts coming through. You don't have all the other distractions that you would distract yourself with. So I was saying it's probably 1,000 million times more difficult than just meditating.
Well, certainly, I found it difficult just to sit and do nothing. I found it quite painful at times, actually. But that was simply a reflection of my mental state of the moment. But I was determined just to try and sit and feel it, experience it fully. Yeah, I'll come to you in a moment. And it's not. I wouldn't say that it's more that you get thousands more thoughts, but you're aware, much more aware of what's going on in your mind. In a way, what you're left with is your mind, just the bare mind. And I think what it does is it helps you to get down to the bare bones, as it were, of your mind. Those habitual mental states that really, somehow or other, you've got to stop identifying with. Because when you identify with them, they determine your behaviour.
It's also something, your conversation with your friend about your newsletter and how people perceive you.
Yeah.
When you're meditating, you want to address the issues that are bothering you, because they will come up in meditation as well.
Well, you need to take note of them, but I think what was the danger for me was that I was allowing, if you like, anxiety about that to arise, and then I needn't do that. If I don't bother what people think about me, because frankly it doesn't matter. We tend to think that it does matter how other people perceive us, but actually, frankly, it doesn't. It doesn't really matter in the end whether people like you or not. And if people dislike you, well, so be it.
That's one episode, but what I really want to do, what I really want to say is, if something is bothering you,
Yeah.
if you put it aside, it is going to come up again.
Well, if you push it to one side, if you don't address it, I don't think I was doing that on my retreat. Rather the opposite. Things were confronting me in a way that I wasn't always enjoying, but I knew I had to face. Do you mind if we move on? There's one. I promised an answer to this lady over here.
Experiencing and observing the nature around you, or the nature. Did you feel that was a distraction, or was it somehow helping you connect with the essence, or something else?
I think it was a supportive condition, because I don't know. It wasn't anything which was distracting me. I was just observing it. Well, maybe it did become a bit of a distraction in a way, because I fitted up some bird tables and I crushed almonds for the birds and watched them fight over it, which was great fun. I used to watch Bird Wars every evening. But they're pretty vicious, believe me. But I also used to watch sunsets every evening. My hut faced directly west, and I just sit and enjoy the sheer beauty of every sunset. I don't know, 260 odd sunsets I watched. Everyone was different. Everyone was beautiful in its own unique way. Sometimes, of course, there wasn't sunset, it was just mist. But it didn't matter. That had a magical quality to it. So I enjoyed the nature surrounding me, the elements, the animals, the sky, the stars, the moon. Moonlight's wonderful. I hadn't realised just how wonderful moonlight is. I found myself being so grateful to the moon when it was there. I actually felt a sense of gratitude to the moon. There's one thing I forgot to mention. The positive side the positive emotional dimension of my retreat, I experienced a lot of gratitude for what I'd been given by my teachers. And I don't just mean Sangharakshita, I mean teachers when I was younger, when I was a young actor, directors I worked with who really helped me, people who didn't have to behave in such a kind way to me, but they did anyway. At times even when I deserved severity rather than kindness, that sort of thing. All sorts of reflections like that arose, and I had a tremendous sense of gratitude. I also felt a deepening sense of faith in the Dharma, and a great sense of devotion to the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha. That all happened in the course of my retreat. I forgot to mention all that, but it's really important.
When you speak about it, it really sounds as though you almost fell in love with these things, nature, the moon and such.
Well, I've always appreciated nature. I think it's a very important aspect of human life, actually. And I think if you can appreciate the beauty of nature, just as you can appreciate the beauty of the fine arts, it will help to make you a better human being. And I think again, it's one of my purposes, by the way, I forgot to mention that when I first talked with Subhuti about, after his long retreat, what do you think you gained by it? One of the things he said to me was, he said, well, he couldn't quite put his finger on in what way, but he felt that at the end of his retreat, he had in some subtle way emerged as a better human being. And when things got difficult for me, I remembered that, and I thought, all this is going to be worthwhile if at the end of my retreat I emerge in some subtle way a slightly better human being. And I believe that I probably did. And I think that the appreciation of nature and the beauty of the environment that I found myself in, as well as a very, very strong experience of the elements, including fire. I had to be evacuated one afternoon because there was a fire in the valley. It's quite dangerous. I really appreciated all that, and there were supportive conditions to what I was trying to do.
I just want to speak up on the last point.
I'm not sure whether we're going over time. I'm happy to answer this.
Yeah.
Make this the last point then. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you meant, It sounds like these long retreats are almost like an essential part of maturing, whether you're going for enlightenment or whether you're going from boyhood to manhood, like a rite of passage, if you like, because older cultures had things which are representative of it, like Viking culture, when men would take time to lie in the ashes by the fire. When they felt the need, they would go and lie down, and the community would let them do that, and they would take their time, however long that would take, and then they would stand up from the ashes when they felt it was the right time, and they would go out and they would become warriors, or they would become poets or whatever. But something changed in them, and that was something that community kind of encouraged and allowed to happen, and we don't. So a long retreat seems to really represent that, and has to be more of an active process.
I've never really thought about that. I mean, there might be something of that sort involved in it. But I think the important thing for me was that I wanted it to be a life-changing experience. And now that I'm able to look back over that time, I think for me it really was. I feel so grateful I had the opportunity to do it. I feel quite blessed that I was able to do it. On that note, we should finish.